saying about the decision by the Queen to have Prince Andrew front and centre, front and centre of those of the service of Thanksgiving. Sid says, I might not be the biggest fan of Prince Andrew. I do think people are willfully overreacting. This means nothing more than the love between a mother and her son at a very difficult time. As for people's views on whether he's trying to make a comeback, just let people imagine something. It doesn't make it true. Well, I don't think we'll see the Duke of York for the remembrance of the Falklands conflict, which of course is 20 years ago this weekend, but the Platinum Jubilee, who knows? More calls on that in a moment. It is 9 before 8. Let's come to other matters. And a promise from the Justice Secretary, from whom you'll hear in a moment, pledging to keep dangerous criminals in prison as long as necessary as he chooses or tries to take back the power to block the release of up to 100 murderers, rapists, terrorists and child killers a year. He will announce today he's going to have these additional powers. And to give us a brief outline of what he hopes to achieve, Deputy Prime Minister and Justice Secretary joins me now. What will we hear from you later today, Deputy Prime Minister? Good morning.
Good morning, Nick. Well, look, I'll set out the detailed proposals in Parliament in the normal way, but I think the first duty of government is to protect the public, and our plans are to reinforce the parole system, which is for the difficult, finely balanced decision-making in relation to dangerous and serious offenders, and to make sure that those decisions are adopting a precautionary principle which protects the public above all other considerations. I also want to make sure that victims' voices are heard more clearly throughout the parole system, as indeed we want heard more clearly throughout the justice system, so that they don't feel that there's some sort of afterthought in the process. And we'll look at everything from the criteria for release, the composition of the parole boards, the role of victims, and also, as you said, the question of a ministerial check for that top tier of the most serious offences.
Are the voices not being heard? Why are the voices not being heard clearly enough at the moment, Deputy Prime Minister?
There's a number of things that happened. The original statutory test for release on parole grounds set out that that release would be only ordered where detention was no longer necessary to protect the public. It has shifted over time from that overriding emphasis on public protection to a balancing act between protecting the public and the rights of defenders. I think there's an issue around the composition of the Parole Board. The Parole Board do excellent work. It's not a criticism of the hard-working staff and members, but it struck me that just 5% of Parole Board members come from a law enforcement background. When you're dealing with finely balanced questions of risk, there isn't some sort of scientific algorithm that can tell you the answer. It comes down to judgment calls. And I think the experience of police officers, and ultimately the public will expect ministers who come on shows like this, take responsibility, also to have the powers to intervene, to put public protection first. That's what we'll achieve.
How much of what you're choosing or seeking to do, Deputy Prime Minister, is informed by the release of Colin Pitchfork, the double child murderer, and the attempt, although overruled, to release the so-called black cab rapist John Warboys?
Both of those are very well-known cases. And of course, we think about the victims in those cases and the public anxiety. The reality is that the Parole Board deals with something like 13,000 cases that it concludes each year. And those are really just some of the most high-profile and most serious cases. For many, many cases, the overwhelming majority of the Parole Board works fine. I think there is a case when you look at the top slice of the most serious offenders, probably around 10 to 15% of that overall workload at the Parole Board. Just to say, actually, the criteria need to be toughened up. The composition of the Parole Board needs to be, if you like, I'd like to see a few more grizzled police officers who really know what protecting the public in the community looks like on those parole boards. And ultimately, I think ministers need to have the ability to intervene when it's unclear about risk or for the most serious cases. And I think that's what victims expect. I suspect that's what your listeners expect.
Lastly, your timing is interesting. You'll be aware the Parole Board is due to announce today whether the mother of tortured baby P, you may recall, this is Tracy Connolly, can be released. How might your moves today colour that?
Well, I don't want to talk. I'm always very careful about, because it's a quasi-judicial process, of intervening and commenting, on radio shows as august as this on individual cases.
Do you think she should be released?
I think you need to wait for the decision, and I'm always very careful to follow the rules. We need to do this thing with integrity. We need to follow a rules-based approach. But my view on all of this is that public protection needs to be put first. I'm not satisfied for the high-risk cases that we are doing that as strongly as we should be, and I'll set out the detailed proposals today about how we can. We can't eliminate risk in our society, but the public expect us to have the safeguards in place to mitigate it to the best of our ability.
But I won't need to remind you that Baby P, or Baby Peter, had gashes to his head, a fractured shin bone, a ripped ear, blackened fingers and toes, missing fingernails, skin torn from his nose and mouth, cuts on his neck, and a tooth knocked out. It wouldn't say much for your reforms if his mum came out, would it?
Look, I remember that case vividly. As a father of young boys, I find it haunting. And you'll know that in relation to the case of Tony Hudgell, we have already, in the Police Courts Crime and Sentencing Bill, increased the sentencing for both for child cruelty, which is absolutely right. So I think my views on this are very well known.
Let's move to other matters. I'm sure you will commend 150,000 families in this country who have registered their interest in housing people seeking refuge from Ukraine. Sadly, it is reported just over 1,000 have actually made it to the UK. It's being described as a flop. Do you concur?
No, I don't. We've had
1,000 out of 150,000, Deputy Prime Minister. If that's not a flop, what is it, sir?
Well, so first of all, we've had 22,000 visas issued under the family route. There have been 200,000 applications for sponsorship under that route. We're processing 1,000 applications per day. We are going to publish the data, I believe, shortly, very soon, on how many visas under the sponsorship route have been granted. But there are a whole range of challenges in relation to it. We've set up as expedite and streamline a process as possible. But from getting individuals to the UK, the logistical challenge in that, to the processing of those claims, it is not a tick box exercise. It takes some care and some doing. But I'm proud of the approach that we've taken on top of the £400 million of humanitarian aid and the lead that we've taken in other areas.
But why so few arrivals, do you imagine, Deputy Prime Minister?
Well, we're going to get as I said, the data on this will be published. I can see totally understand it's an interest to the public, but I can't confirm those numbers. But the challenges that you're asking about, there's challenges of processing, of then getting individuals here from Ukraine. That is not straightforward. We're dealing with a war zone, but we're doing everything that we can, and there'll be a further data provided about the actual numbers under the sponsorship route. As I said, we've already had 22,000 visas, so that is under the family route, which is, of course, the dependents of Ukrainians that are here, or indeed of British nationals here.
OK. Lastly, the papers are reporting a party of sorts thrown by the Prime Minister yesterday for some of his Conservative colleagues. Were you in attendance, Deputy Prime Minister?
No, I'm afraid I couldn't make it because I was up at with the Sparrows, coming in to talk to you and to do this media round, and also preparing for our parole reforms that we're launching today.
How wise was it on the day that Number 10 announced what could be the first raft of fines from other parties to hold a party yesterday, Deputy Prime Minister? Does that show wisdom?
Well, actually getting the parliamentary party together, particularly after a long period where we've all been in lockdown, I think there'll be plenty of employers and teams, professional and otherwise, around the country that are starting to do that. I think it's part of getting back to normal.
Can we make jokes about the Ukraine? The Prime Minister saying he's currently more popular in parts of Kyiv than he is in parts of Kensington. Is the Ukraine a laughing matter, Deputy Prime Minister?
Do you know what? I don't think he was trying to make a joke. I think he was pointing out, and President Zelensky has said it, and many others have said it, that we sometimes don't see ourselves as others do. And in Ukraine, there is huge recognition of the role we've taken, leading the way on sanctions, on humanitarian support. I was out in The Hague on Thursday. I brought together and hosted a meeting of 38 countries supporting the ICC's war crimes investigation. The Ukrainian Justice Minister was there, Nick, and aside from the heartwarming and courageous tale that he told, he also again repeated his gratitude to the UK, but also the international effort that we spearheaded. And I think the PM was just pointing that out.
OK, so lastly, but we can make jokes about Putin then. Again at this gathering that you were unable to attend because you were working. The Prime Minister quotes, "One of the reasons Putin is deluded and isolated is because he has no cabinet of equals, no 1922 committee, no one to write 54 letters to Sir Graham Brady." So we can have a chuckle about Vladimir Putin.
Well, I think we can point out, and it's right, that if Russia was a proper democracy, we wouldn't have someone like Putin in place. But that's for the Russian people to decide.
Grateful for your time as ever. Good luck with those reforms. You're right, the listeners will be cheering you to the echo. Deputy Prime Minister, Justice Secretary Dominic Raab appearing here on LBC 1 minute after 8. News is next.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock.